Good morning. My name's Josh. I'm the Connections and Outreach pastor here, and I am so happy that I get a chance to share a little bit of what God has been teaching me over the last several weeks. But if this is your first time here, I want to say welcome. I love when people come and check out a church, or maybe they haven't been in a while, or maybe you're new to the area. But if you've been coming here for a while, welcome back. But most likely, most of us in the room here probably remember how you first got connected here. Maybe you heard about the church because you were, as I mentioned, you were new to the area, so you decided to type into the World Wide Web and you started to click and look for churches. Or maybe you went to one of the events that we host, like the Back to School Fair event, or an egg hunt, or a coat drive. And in the midst of that, you came to it, and it caused you to be curious about what this church might be about. But my guess is that for most of the people inside of the room here, how you first got connected to the church is through a person. There was someone within your life, maybe it was a coworker that you kind of knew well, and then they ended up inviting you, saying, hey, you need to come and check out this church. It's different. Or maybe it was a family member that you began to look at their lives, and over the next several months, you saw like their lives were changing. Like they started to go to this church, and they were starting to figure out like what it meant to follow Jesus. And you say, okay, I'm kind of curious about, like, is this place a cult? Like, what is it about? So you decided to come and check it out. Or maybe it was through someone you didn't even know yet, that in the midst of, while you were shopping or whatever it was, came and invited you to come. And I love that God uses ordinary people like us to do extraordinary things in the lives of those that we have circles of influence around us. And I love that the stories that I'm hearing now is many that have come are finding hope in Jesus, and then also finding purpose of figuring out, like, what does it mean to like spend my life well? All of us want to have our lives to be used well, right? When we leave this earth, we want to know that what we did mattered. For my wife and I, we first got connected to the church here over 6 years ago, before there was ever an actual church here. At the time, I was a youth minister in Illinois and doing my best to help students know what it meant to follow and love Jesus. And my wife and I, we were newlyweds. We've been married for 2 years and still trying to figure out that whole marriage thing. And at that time, Jared Calger, who is our teaching and leadership pastor here, gave us a call. And I still remember, I'm not quite sure if it was via Skype or FaceTime, whatever they had back then technology-wise, but I remember him calling and asking us to move out here to start a church with a few others. And I remember that as he was sharing about the need for more churches in New England. And you might not know this, but New England is the least church area of the entire country, and has the lowest attendance rate in the entire country too. And he began to share his love for the people, his passion for those that he had begun to connect with, that he just loved those that were here. And then he began to share what my role would be. So I immediately thought, I was like, okay, cool, I get to be the youth minister of a new church. That would be really, really cool. Help students to learn what it means to know and love and follow Christ. And then he goes, okay, so I want you to begin to oversee groups for adults, helping to create relational environments for people outside of a Sunday morning. Because on Sunday mornings, you might like begin to like know names or connect with people, but you get to like actually know them in the context of a group. And then also oversee our outreach efforts to build relationships inside of the community and throw big events and stuff like that. And in that moment, I panicked. I was like, what? I don't know how to do that. I've been leading students my entire life, and now you're asking me to lead adults, many of which who are twice my age and been Christians for longer than I've been alive. Now, all of this internal conflict I didn't verbalize yet until I said, Jared, there's just one problem. I said, the problem is that I look like I'm 12. Like, people aren't going to respect me. They're not going to look at me. They're going to be like, who is this kid talking? And then Jared, in this moment, like as God gave him wisdom of what to say, he said, Josh, grow a beard. Grow a beard. People respect you more. People respect people with beards. And so in the midst of that, okay, if I'm honest, Jared didn't say that. He didn't say that. He didn't say that last part. But the truth is that Jared saw potential in me that I didn't see within myself. Jared was able to, as he spent time with God, as he went before him in prayer, as he listened to him carefully, he asked God, what do you see in Josh? And then Jared had what we call an I see in you conversation. Jared began to say, this is what I see in you because of what God has said, not just because of how smart he is, but because it was something that God was welling up inside of him to say, this person can do more than he thinks is possible. And that changed everything. And after we had that conversation, it then resulted in, as he said that, to begin to invest in me, to bring that out. For us, over the last several weeks, we've been in a series called I See in You. And they're conversations as we look at stories in the Old Testament here, where God saw something extraordinary in the most ordinary people like us and brought out the greatness within them to make his name greater. So today we are finishing up our series where we're looking at the story of a man named Samuel that was just ordinary like us, but God chose to use for extraordinary things. So if you have a Bible with you, or if you like to grab one inside of the racks in front of you, we're going to be looking at the story of 1 Samuel chapter 3, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 11. So as you guys are kind of flipping through there, if you need some help finding it, the Bible is divided up into two different sections. You got the Old Testament, which is the first half, and you got the New Testament, which is the second half here. So if you're trying to find it, we're in the first half. Just start to flip, and then if you are in like Exodus, Genesis, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, just keep going. You'll eventually get to 1 and 2 Samuel, and we're in 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. A little bit of the backstory that you're probably going to want to know is that during this time, God's people are being led by what are called prophets. Prophets are people that would speak on God's behalf and would tell God's people what God is telling them. Now, this wasn't just a random person that could say, I'm a prophet, this is what God says, and they could say whatever they wanted. But these prophets were proven through God's divine power, that they would be able to know things in advance before they happen. God used them to do miraculous things. You've heard of Moses who could part the Red Sea. So people would go, clearly God is with that person. We should listen. So what happens is that there were prophets. There were also priests. Priests were the ones that would oversee the religious duties of the temple for the sacrifices that were needed for the atonement of sin before Jesus eventually came and paid for all sin. And these priests were raised from a young age inside of the temple. They would learn what it meant to be a priest by a mentor, a higher priest. So the story that we're going into, Samuel is a young boy, about the age of 12, and under his mentor, Eli, he's receiving teaching about what does it mean to do his duties. But at this point in time, it is late in the night. Based upon the text, we can see it's about 2 a.m. when this situation happens. So starting in verse 1, it says, the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli, his mentor. And it says, in those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions, which means that God hadn't revealed himself. God hadn't spoken in a while. They were going off what they have heard previously. And then going on, it says, one night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out yet, and was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. Now remember, boy, 12 years old. It's about 2 a.m. in the morning, and he's running to someone who's sleeping. So then this happens. If you have a child, you know this experience. And he said, but Eli said, I did not call you. Go back and lie down. So he went and lay down. And again, the Lord called Samuel. Samuel! And Samuel got up and went to Eli, persistent, and said, here I am. You called me. He said, my son. Eli said, I did not call. Go back and lie down. Moving on, it says, now Samuel did not know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not been revealed to him. And what this means is that Samuel knew about God. He had heard the stories. He had talked to Samuel. He had talked to Eli. He had heard about God, but he had not experienced God personally. He has not heard from God like a prophet would through a vision or audibly. But then it goes on. And it says, a third time the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. Now, remember, the word of the Lord had been rare. God hadn't spoken for a while. And then Eli, the one who had been leading God's people, realizes in that moment that the Lord has chosen this small boy, Samuel, to speak through. He probably didn't know everything that was going to be coming up in the future, but he understood and saw that God was beginning to use this little boy, someone that he now needed to invest in, who are going to lead God's people moving forward. So he teaches him. And it says this, it says, so Eli told Samuel, go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, speak, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and the Lord came and stood there, calling as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. And then the Lord said to Samuel, see, I'm about to do something in Israel that to make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle. Now, if you want to read the rest of the story, what ends up happening is that God gave Samuel some not so great news regarding the house of Eli. If you want to look at that later on, the big idea is that God really cares about leaders leading others well. But in the midst of this, God chooses Samuel, and then in verses 19 through 21, it says this. It says, the Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. And all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, it's a hard word to pronounce, recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. So Samuel becomes a big deal. People know him. And people begin to see that he's been proven by God to be someone that speaks on God's behalf. And over the next 50 years, Samuel is used by God to lead God's people, to help him to know him. What does it mean to follow him? And continuously calls him back time and time again. Samuel calls God's people back over and over again to say, don't do life the way that you think it should be lived. Trust that God knows how to live your life better than you do. Over and over again. And then so the story that we're entering now is that Samuel is about 65 years old, been proven to lead God's people for that long. And then something happens. So jumping into chapter 8. Chapter 8. It says this. Chapter 8, verse 4. It says, so all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. And they said to him, you are old. Not the best way to start a speech conversation. But it goes on and says, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. So what they're saying is, Samuel, you don't cut it any longer. You are washed up. And your kids, we're not going to talk about them. Like, they're definitely not going to do it. And we know that God's kind of far off. And we really don't want him to be king anymore. We want our own physical king, like all the other nations have. And this breaks Samuel's heart. This is the response. Samuel says in verse 6, it says, but they said, give us a king and to lead us. And it says, this pleased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. I love that whenever Samuel experienced emotion and frustration and irritation and his heart was broken, he went to God with it first. He didn't just go off based upon what he thought, what he should do. He said, I need to bring my frustration, my emotions to God. So he brought it to him, and then this is what the Lord said. So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all of the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. And then jump into verse 21. It says this. It says, when Samuel heard that all of the people had said, he repeated it before the Lord. And the Lord answered, listen to them and give them a king. So to recap, is God says, Samuel, don't take it personal. It's not about you. It's about me. They've rejected me. They haven't rejected you. But I need you to give them a king, and the king will not be you. I know that you've been leading God's people. I know you've been proving yourself here, but I need you now to invest into another rather than you taking that position. So in that moment, Samuel has a choice to make. He can either become an old, bitter man that covets a position of leadership and authority that he has and could fill, or he could see that his greatest influence for God could be in someone that he invests in. That his greatest influence for God wouldn't be the days that were behind him, but could be before him, but in another. A king that he could raise up that would do far immeasurably more than he ever could, leading a nation of people to know, follow, and commit to helping others know and love and follow God too. And as we look at the story of Samuel, I want to suggest that we have a lesson that we can learn from the life of Samuel. That the greatest influence you and I can make for God is as we invest into the lives of others. The greatest influence that you and I can make will be the people that you invest in. See, each one of us has different circles of influence and people that we have around us. That God wants us to use our influence to help them take another step towards Jesus, helping those go further and beyond where we currently are. You see, each one of us here, my guess is that there are times where maybe God has brought to your mind a coworker. See, God starts nudging your heart. He starts going, hey, you see that coworker? I want you to begin an actual friendship with them, a real one, not one that goes beyond the lunchroom, but into your living room. Or maybe not the living room, maybe like a coffee shop. I mean, we don't want to get too crazy. You know, your kids are at your house, so maybe the coffee shop instead. But can you imagine if all of a sudden you begin to invest into your coworkers, into the lives of those that are around you? What would happen if you began to invest into your family, into your spouse, into your brother, into your sister, to an aunt or an uncle? Can you imagine if the conversations you had around your dinner table weren't just updates about your week or surface level conversations, but if conversations about God were common? Now, not that these conversations would always be agreeable or comfortable or always be accepted, but if conversations about God weren't foreign. But if there are these moments that God used you to invest into the lives of those that were around you, helping them to go even farther and beyond where you currently are with Jesus, wouldn't that be incredible? That would be amazing. But the questions that naturally come up with that is how? As you look at your life, it's like, how do you begin to invest into others? I mean, your lives are busy, my lives are busy. You're probably going, what do I say? What do I do? Where do I lead them? How do I make this happen? And through the life of Samuel, we can see that as God is now calling him to invest into the first two kings of Israel, helping them to go further than even he did, there's some insights that we can gain from this story that helps us to know how to do this ourselves. So the first thing is, as we begin to want to invest into those that are around us, whether it's a coworker, friend, neighbor, whoever that might be, the first thing that we have to do is we have to learn to listen carefully to the voice of God. We have to learn how to listen carefully to the voice of God. And Samuel, from a very young age, he had learned to listen carefully to God's voice by consistently going to him as his source of direction. We see that at the very beginning of chapter 3. It's this verse that we've already read. But 1 Samuel chapter 3, it reads this in verses 9 and 10. It says, so Eli told Samuel, go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, speak, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and the Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other time, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, for your servant is listening. You see, Samuel understood at the very beginning that hearing from God was always more important than being heard by God. Hearing from God, getting the direction and the wisdom that he needed was always more important than simply stating what he wanted God to hear from him. And this was most evident as he invested into the first king of Israel. Hearing from God. We see this as the time goes on, God begins to evidence and say, I'm going to give you a heads up with who the future king is. And in 1 Samuel chapter 8, 1 Samuel chapter 9, I apologize. 1 Samuel chapter 9, starting at verse 15, God reveals to him that the future king will be Saul. And this is what it says. It says, now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for the cry has reached me. I love that it said that it's not because of how good you are, Samuel. I have heard my people, and I'm the one rescuing them. I'm choosing to use you. And then going on, it says, when Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. So, in the midst of this, Samuel is learning to listen to God's voice, and I love that it says the day before. So the day before he meets Saul, the day before there's any type of interaction, Samuel has gone before God, has spent time with him as he regularly would, and all of a sudden God says, hey, change of plans. I need you to be here tomorrow, and I need you to begin to keep your eyes open, because I'm going to show you the future king. And it was Samuel's job to consistently do his best to listen, do his best to understand, and do his best to obey with what he knows. That was his part. Now, for many of us here, you probably read that and you go, Josh, that sounds like great, this whole like listening for God's voice and stuff like that, but God doesn't talk to me like that. And I don't know about you, but I read this and I'm like, God, that sounds kind of easy. Like, kind of just told him what's up. I just told him exactly what to be looking out for and what to do. And if it provides any comfort, God usually doesn't talk in this way. God doesn't usually audibly say, here's what that is. He's never done that in my life. He's never been like, Josh, listen. Probably because I'd freak out. But in the midst of this, it's this consistent pursuit of trying to listen to God. And I think that there's some heart to this that we have to get to. It's that you listening to God's voice has less to do with your ability and more to do with your willingness. Listening to God's voice has less to do with your ability, how well you can hear him, how much you know of his word. It has more to do with your willingness to go to him and to say, here I am, Lord, speak, I'm listening. And God can use that because if you are willing, you will learn. God will begin to nudge your heart and saying, hey, there's some people I want you to invest in. And as you're spending time reading his word and you're like, this is confusing, I don't understand it, just keep reading, keep pressing in, keep trying to listen to God because he honors that. Because then what will happen is as you are training your heart to hear from God, eventually he will say, that's the one. That coworker, the person I've been putting on your heart as you spend time with me, that's the one I want you to invest in. That person in your home group, the person you met at the summer club, that's her. That's him. That spouse, that brother, that conversation that you had that didn't go well. God is saying, that's the person I want you to invest in. And sometimes it'll be really, really hard. The question is are you willing? And I want you to hear this, is if you are willing and if you obey, that is enough. If you are willing and you obey what God is saying, that is enough and that honors him. So the question that maybe many of us have to begin asking is God, who do you want me to begin to invest in? You start to pray this prayer, is God, who do you want me to begin to invest in? Who is it? You start praying, God, help me to see people differently. Help me to see the one that you want me not just to pray for, but then to help them to take another step towards Jesus. And often, as we pray this, sometimes we're waiting for a sign. We're waiting for a sign to pop up like this one. And sometimes, and I know it because I'm there are many times where I'm like, all right, God, like I'll do what you say, but I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for you to say, this is the one. So let me give you a word of caution. Pray. Talk to God, of course. But move forward. Push forward. Seek God out and ask, who do you want me to invest in? But continue to move forward because sometimes God has one person, a specific person in mind for you. And other times God just says, make a wise choice. Pick someone because everyone needs him. And you can help someone take another step towards Jesus and to be used in absolutely amazing, extraordinary ways if you do your part. So first, we have to listen carefully to the voice of God. And second, you have to carve out time for people. You and I, if we want to invest into those that are around us, this is the catchy part, right? This is the one that hurts. We have to carve out time for people. And sometimes it's convenient and sometimes it's not. But people aren't machines. People require relationships and investment and love. And Samuel understood that as he is beginning to invest into the future King Saul. In chapter 9, jumping then to verse 22, it says this. It says, Saul answered, verse 22. It says, Then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. So what happens is Saul, told by God, this guy's coming. He sees him. He's like, all right, I need to connect with them. Let's throw a party. So he throws a party. He throws a party for Saul. Moving on, it says, Samuel said to the cook, Bring the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside. It says, So the cook took up the thigh that was on it and set it in front of Saul. And Samuel said, Here is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it was set aside for you for this occasion from the time I said, I have invited guests. And Saul dined with Samuel that day. So the relationship began by them meeting around the dinner table. I wonder what that conversation was like, introducing him to these 30 other people, probably leaders that he'll eventually be leading and knowing. So he begins a relationship there, but then it continues on. It says, After they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of his house. In the next very beginning line, it says, And they rose about daybreak. So he said, Hey, let's go up to the roof. I want us to have a conversation. And most likely they stayed up for several hours talking, and this conversation was probably a lot about Saul getting to know Samuel's story and Samuel getting to know Saul's. Hearing from each other. Samuel probably hearing the insecurities of Saul, who doesn't know yet that he'll be the future king of Israel. But then Samuel speaking these life-giving words is speaking about how great God is and what God has done in his own life, causing him to want that for himself. And as it continues on, it says this. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul on the roof, Get ready, I will send you on your way. And when Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. As they were going down to the edge of the town, Samuel said to Saul, Tell the servant to go on ahead of us. And the servant did so. But you stay here for a while that I may give you a message from God. So as they're walking on the road, he said, Hey, your servant, if he could give us some space, I want to have a private conversation with you. And then Samuel has this I see in you conversation where he reveals to him that he'll be the future king of Israel, speaking words of hope and life and direction into someone that he gradually was getting to know. Now, as you look at this for our own life, we have to carve out time for people just like Samuel did. But you're probably worried, Samuel knew the right things to say. Samuel knew the right thing to tell him, and as I'm trying to listen to God, what if I don't know the right thing to tell them, but don't know the exact message from God? Here's the reality, is that the people that you invest in, they need your presence more than they need your perfection. They need you to be present with them more than they need your perfect words. Because God can do a lot if you show up. God will do immeasurably more than you can even ask or imagine in the lives of your kids, in the lives of your spouse, in the lives of your coworkers, in the people that God calls you to invest in if you show up. God is calling us to show up, to be there, to love well. And if you're worried about still, what are you going to say? Here's what I really believe, is that as you are present with people, as you sit with them around the dinner table, as you're with them on the roof, God will give you the words that you need for on the road. As you begin to have relationships and build within them, as you hear their stories, God will begin to whisper things into your heart. As you seek him out, he'll say, this is what you need to tell them. And it might just be simply, you are loved You're worth more than you think. And he might say, hey, you can do more than you think, just like Jared did for me. But we have to be willing to carve out time for the people within our life to make that a reality. Third, is you have to be willing to try again. As you invest into others, is you have to be willing to try again. You see, Samuel, as he invested into the future King Saul, Saul eventually becomes king and leads God's people. But he eventually sins and goes against what God wants. He thinks that he knows how to live his life better than God does. And God removes the kingdom from him and says he's going to give it to another. And there will be times in your life where the people that you invest in, they fail. Sometimes they don't want to trust Jesus with their life. They'd rather do their own way. And it'll break your heart. And there are other times where you'll fail them, where your life will get too busy, you won't invest, you won't do the time that you needed. And you have to be willing to try again. No matter how far along the line that you think that you are, if you're too far gone, you have to be willing to try again. And Samuel saw this. In 1 Samuel 16, verse 1, it reads this. It says, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul? Since I have rejected him as king. Then he says, fill your horn with the oil. And be on your way, for I am sending you to Jesse. Of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of the sons to be king. So what he's saying is that as you mourn for Saul, as you mourn for whoever that person is, how long is that going to be? How long will you mourn for someone? Because God is saying, I have someone else waiting for you. And that is so good. God is not done. God is saying, I still want to advance my kingdom because it is about him, not us. So he's saying, how long will you mourn? And for us, you have to be willing to try again. And what this teaches us is that God measures your faithfulness above your results. God measures your faithful pursuit to invest into others more than what the results might be. Because you have to do your part. You trust that God is going to do his. And your heart can break when others don't do theirs. But you have to be willing to be faithful in the midst of that. Finally, as we close out, you have to want someone to be greater than you. As you invest into others, you have to want someone to be greater than you. You see, Samuel, from a young age, he had trained his heart to listen to God, understanding that if you first want someone else to be greater than you on this earth, you have to understand that there is one that is greater than you in heaven. That our life is not about us, it is about him. And our lives are constantly this pattern of pointing more and more people to him because he is the one that matters. And what that results in is that you don't care who gets the credit. You don't care who gets to be the one on stage. You don't care if you're the one in the back doing the dishes because your part is to invest into someone else and make them greater than you are. And if you want someone to be greater than you, man, can God use that for great things. So for all of us here today, because we have a choice. It says at the very end of Samuel's life that it said that he died and all of Israel gathered around him and they mourned, and then it continued. The kingdom of God continues on. But the people around him, those that he invested in and spent his time with, stayed. And the reality is that if you invest into others, your influence for God will reach more and go further. Because the people that you invest in will then invest into others. And their circles of influence will be different than yours, so it'll go further. And it'll last longer because when you are gone, they will remain, which is why we have a church today. Because disciples of Jesus made more disciples of Jesus who made more disciples of Jesus. And it was because people just like you were in a room like this, and they said, I will invest in another. I will do my part to help someone go beyond and above what I have done, not because of how great I am, but because of how great God is. Jump on board. Get in the game. And God will use you to do amazing things. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you chose to use us. If I'm honest, I don't get it. You could do anything that you want on your own, yet you've chosen to want to use us, ordinary people, to invest into the lives of others that makes an eternal difference. So God, I pray for everyone here, that they would hear this message, God, and they would do something with it. They would invest in someone. They would seek you out and ask, who? Who is the one that you want me to invest in, God? And they would help them take another step towards you. We ask all these things in your Son's name.